Maybe your first relationship was never your first relationship. It sounds impossible. Most of us believe our story began with our first kiss, our first heartbreak, or the first person who made us fall in love. But what if the way you love today was shaped long before any of that happened? Have you ever noticed how some people keep falling into the same kind of relationship? The faces change, the names change, the places change, yet somehow the emotional story stays the same. Someone who never feels truly secure, someone who always seems emotionally distant, someone who gives just enough affection to keep you hoping for more. It's tempting to call it bad luck or coincidence, but what if there is another explanation? What if we aren't only choosing people, but also choosing feelings that already feel familiar? Think about that for a moment. Why does one person feel safe when a relationship is calm, while another immediately assumes something is wrong? Why does one person see independence, while another feels abandoned? The relationship hasn't changed. Only the experience has, which raises an uncomfortable question. Where does that experience come from? We often imagine love as something spontaneous. Two strangers meet, they laugh, they connect, and from that moment, a relationship begins. But perhaps that's only where the relationship becomes visible. Maybe the real beginning happened much earlier, long before romance, long before attraction, long before we even understood what love was. Because before we ever learn who to love, we first learn what love feels like. And that quiet lesson may influence every relationship that follows. To understand why we love the way we do, we have to go back to a time most of us can no longer remember. Back to the very beginning. Every one of us enters the world without knowing what love is. A newborn doesn't know what trust feels like. It doesn't know what rejection is. It doesn't even know who it is. There's only one instinct: to reach out when something feels wrong, to cry when it is hungry, to search for comfort when it is afraid. And every time someone responds, the brain quietly learns something, not through words, through experience. Imagine a baby crying in the middle of the night. Someone picks them up, holds them, calms them down. The baby doesn't think people can be trusted. It simply feels safe. Now imagine the same situation. The baby cries. Sometimes someone comes. Sometimes no one does. Sometimes comfort arrives with patience. Sometimes with frustration. The baby still learns something. Only the lesson is different. This is how our first definition of love begins. Not through advice, not through conversations, but through thousands of ordinary moments that most of us will never remember. That is what makes childhood so remarkable. We rarely remember those early years, yet they quietly become the foundation for many of the relationships that follow. Because memories are not the only thing the brain stores. It also stores expectations. What closeness usually feels like. What happens when we need someone. Whether the world feels predictable or uncertain. These expectations become so familiar that we stop noticing them. They become part of the way we see relationships. Almost like wearing the same pair of glasses every day. After a while, you forget you're wearing them. You simply believe that's what the world looks like. Love works in much the same way, long before we understand it. We begin to expect it to feel a certain way. For some people, love feels calm. For others, it feels unpredictable. For others, closeness itself can feel uncomfortable. None of those expectations appear overnight. They are built slowly, one ordinary day at a time. And years later, when we meet someone new, we don't experience them with a blank mind. We experience them through everything we've already learned, which may explain why two people can live through the exact same relationship and walk away with completely different experiences. Because before we choose who to love, our minds have already learned what love is supposed to feel like. And once those expectations become part of us, they quietly begin influencing the people we choose. Years pass. The child grows up. Life becomes more complicated. School, friendships, work, love. Most of us believe we enter our relationships as the people we are today. But perhaps we also bring a much younger version of ourselves with us. One that still remembers what closeness used to feel like. Imagine a child who learns that people usually come back. Not every time, not perfectly, but often enough that the world feels predictable. Years later, this person enters a relationship. There are disagreements, misunderstandings, moments of distance. But distance doesn't immediately feel like danger, because somewhere deep inside, they already believe something important. Love can survive discomfort. Now imagine another child. Sometimes they are comforted. Sometimes they are left wondering. Over time, they learn to pay attention to every small change, every pause, every silence, every shift in someone's voice. Years later, a partner takes a little longer than usual to reply. Nothing unusual has happened. But inside their mind, a different story begins. Did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? The unanswered message isn't what hurts. It's what the message seems to mean. Finally, imagine a child who slowly learns that relying on others often leads to disappointment. So instead of reaching out, they begin relying only on themselves. As adults, they often appear calm, independent, self-sufficient, until someone gets too close. Then, without fully understanding why, they begin creating distance. Not because they don't care, sometimes because they care more than they expected, and closeness itself feels unfamiliar. Looking at these three people, it's easy to think they are completely different. But underneath their behavior lies the same goal: protection. Each of them is trying to avoid a different kind of pain. One fears losing love. One fears never receiving enough of it. One fears depending on it. Psychologists today describe these patterns as secure, anxious, and avoidant attachment. The names are useful, but they are not the most important part, because behind every label is a person who adapted to the world they grew up in. No child chooses how they will experience love as an adult. They simply learn what helps them feel safe. The difficulty is that the strategies which protected us as children don't always help us build healthy relationships as adults. And yet, we continue carrying them. Not because we are broken, but because for a very long time, they worked. If you've recognized yourself in one of these stories, there is something important you should know. None of this means you are destined to become the person you are today. These patterns were never choices. They were adaptations. The mind was simply trying to answer one question: how do I stay safe? For one person, the answer became trust. For another, it became constant reassurance. For someone else, it became emotional distance. None of those answers were wrong. They made sense in the world where they were first learned. The problem is that life changes. We grow up. We meet new people. We enter new relationships. But our old definition of love often comes with us, quietly, without asking for permission. And that may be why so many people spend years searching for the right person, without ever questioning the definition of love they carry inside them. Perhaps the real challenge isn't finding someone who loves us. Perhaps it's learning to recognize love when it doesn't look the way we've come to expect. Sometimes love is calm. Sometimes it is patient. Sometimes it doesn't create butterflies. It creates peace. And for people who grew up believing that love had to feel uncertain, peace can feel unfamiliar. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It may simply mean it's new. Understanding this changes something important. It shifts the question from, why am I like this, to, where did I learn this? Because those are very different questions. The first often leads to self-judgment. The second leads to understanding. And understanding is where real change begins. Not because the past disappears, but because it no longer remains invisible. Maybe your first relationship really was never your first relationship. Maybe it began in the ordinary moments of childhood, in the people who first taught you what closeness felt like, what comfort felt like, what distance felt like. Those moments became part of your story, but they don't have to become the end of it. Because while we cannot choose the first definition of love we receive, we can choose whether we carry it unchanged for the rest of our lives. Perhaps that is what growing up really means. Not finding the perfect relationship, but becoming aware of the invisible one that shaped us long before our first heartbreak. Maybe your first relationship was never your first relationship, but it doesn't have to be your final definition of love. Thank you for watching. If this chapter resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories about psychology, philosophy, and the human mind. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next chapter.